The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host as always, Drew Landry. And folks, thank you for making this the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the Lone Star State. So however, wherever, and whenever you are listening and or watching, please know I'm incredibly grateful for your attention. It really means a lot that you give me some of your time. In today's episode, this is the celebration of the 4th of July, and I am going to discuss one thing here. At some point, I will get back to the trot around the bases, but there's been some bigger things going on that really deserved its own set of attention and its own dedication of time. So today is another one of those. And so I'm going to discuss the document that inspired the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution itself, and perhaps even the very French Revolution that happens about 2 years or so after we adopt our Constitution. And this document serves as the cornerstone for political freedom across the world and the United States, and I'm talking about the Declaration of Independence. I get into what it is, I get into what it isn't, and I also get into what it should be. And so with that, I'm going to just kind of get into it here. And so the reason we will celebrate July 4th, all right, because this happened on July 4th of 1776, where the Second Continental Congress voted unanimously to adopt a Declaration of Independence, a document that would publicly state our absolvement from the British Crown, denounce predestination, and celebrate a new social contract for a free people. This document, however, is often misstated, and there's no better way to set the record straight than on Independence Weekend. In order to give an insightful analysis on this, we must know a few things about the key author of this document. And it becomes the country's third president and our second vice president and our first Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was an incredible intellect. All right, he studied at William and Mary. All right, it was his education that turned him to many different items in life, particularly the Enlightenment period of Western Europe. It was during this era where philosophers argued about equality and liberty and unity, really in the abstract. Not so much about what is, but more along the lines of what could be based on ideas. Little did these philosophers know the brilliant mind of Thomas Jefferson would use those arguments as the foundation for the American Revolution. Jefferson was heavily influenced by several outside forces, make no mistake about that. That's evident in documents he wrote. But the ones that are ever so present in the Declaration come from the Enlightenment period, in philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. There's many others who influenced Jefferson, but those are the three that we really can spend time on. The second paragraph of this document highlights all those types of influences. Jefferson wrote in the Declaration that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson invokes John Locke's natural rights in this very suggestion that these rights can never be removed from any entity. In a state of nature, all people have these rights from birth until death. And while this is an extraordinary theme, right, the most revolutionary idea came from the first part of that sentence. Jefferson, at the behest of Benjamin Franklin, declared equality not as something that may happen at some point in the future, not as something among a societal class, but as a self-evident truth. This is lawyer-like language. To deny the notion of equality according to this logic, he or she is refuting something obvious. And if you say that something is not obvious, you say that you're arguing that it does not exist. So this is brilliant. Furthermore, let's understand the meaning behind the phrase, all men are created equal. Jefferson essentially argued here that King George III, the British nobles, the British officers in colonial America, and the American colonists are the same. This is a complete slap in the face to the feudal system that was known. I mean, the mere suggestion that royalty and colonists were equal, for one, all right, and that it was an obvious truth for two, was blasphemous. And such sacrilege became the basis for the American Revolution. And as brilliant as this declaration was, and it is, it cannot be forgotten that Jefferson called the equality of men a clear truth, but he did not mean it for slaves. Jefferson, like most founding fathers, he was a slaveholder. And there was, however, a draft in the Declaration where Jefferson denounced slavery. But that paragraph had to be removed because of compromise. But make no mistake about this, his denouncement did not stop him from continuing its practice or believing that African Americans were less than whites. Frederick Douglass, in 1852, masterfully articulated this as he gave a speech in Rochester, New York, where he reminded citizens the Declaration was not meant for him. As he said, and I quote, "I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary." Douglass goes on to say here that the 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. It should also be mentioned that women were not included in any of this. At the time when this was being discussed, future First Lady Abigail Adams reminded her husband John to remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. As we enter the 250th anniversary of the Second Continental Congress's adoption of the Declaration, there are still key questions that must be posed. Are we all truly created equal? And if we are, is it a self-evident truth? Do our unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness still exist? And while we think about those particular questions, we can't forget, as brilliant and brave as Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and the 51 other patriots who signed their names to the Declaration were. They were not, however, anywhere near perfect. You know, it's a little side piece here. when we talk about the founding fathers, there's this idea that there were the 13 disciples. I'm sorry, the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles of Christ, and then suddenly, at some point, there were the founding fathers. Incorrect. I mean, let's just be clear here. There were many of the founding fathers were not Christians. And that's easy to point out through just a simple Google search. You don't really have to spend a lot of time finding that. It's a pretty easy cast your net into the ocean and find fish type of search. But when we talk about the founding fathers, we have to remember that they are people. And people, as much as we try to be as, I don't know, the search of perfection, we are not. And so we celebrate this occasion because we should. We must. This is an important time. But we have to honor the past. And we do that by remembering the struggle. And we strive for a future where the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And the answer to the question that's in the Star-Spangled Banner, oh say, does this Star-Spangled Banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? That very question at the end of the first stanza of the Star-Spangled Banner is an unequivocal yes. And quite frankly, people, we're not there. We're not there. If we were there, there wouldn't be this tremendous outcry of what the 14th Amendment means in its first section. Leaders across the country are denouncing that particular interpretation, which, by the way, a 5-year-old who has any reading skills, if you asked them to read that and then you said, what does that mean? They would tell you that, well, if you're born here, then you're a citizen. I mean, you don't have to have Ivy League level education or Big 12 level education, Big 10, Pac-10, whatever. You don't have to have big school education to read that sentence and get the very gist as to what the framers of the 14th Amendment were trying to do and did. And the whole purpose of that was, without question, meant to overturn constitutionally through an amendment the horrific Dred Scott decision. So, I'm saying that because if we truly felt that the answer to the question that we are the land of the free and the home of the brave, and that we truly are created equal, then we wouldn't have this gross set of people who are upset at the interpretation of something that is clearly and plainly written. The 14th Amendment is not exactly difficult to understand. And anybody who tries to make more out of it, you're just simply trying to make a marshmallow out of a cloud. You're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. You're trying to make something that's not there. That's the point. You are looking for something that is ridiculous. You know, I have to say this. I go over the Declaration of Independence every year in my federal government courses. And I go over the, almost every bit of it. The lists of grievances that Jefferson goes through, there's too many for me to really endure through that entire document. So I mention a couple, and then we really just move on to the other portions of that document. But the point that we have to remember is that the world was watching, and they're watching us now. When we do things that are in violation of the very aspect of all men are created equal, that all people are created equal. Because I don't know if we really believe that. Now, we can get into a deeper conversation about equality and, do we all start from the same, and should we all end up as the same and all that? I mean, well, if you want to quote the Bible here, it's really not a bad time. The Bible, is very clear about it. From the dust you came, to the dust you shall return. So, if you want to think of it like that, you want to get very, very basic about it. But struggle for equality has been different for many people throughout the entire country. It's been far easier for white men than it was for women, than it was for people of color, when it was for people of color who are also women. These are struggles that continue to happen to this very day. So, I think the better portion of this, the better thing we like to really remember, is trying to form a more perfect union. That comes from the Constitution. That's in the preamble, where the framers of the Constitution realized that we're not perfect where we are. We're not going to be, so we try to be more perfect. The Declaration is meant to state, to give a public statement as to why we are breaking away from Great Britain. And it's solid reasons. They're not light and transient causes. Jefferson lists a long train of abuses and usurpations. But I think it's very evident that the very goal, the very aspect of natural rights, and what government is meant to do with those rights, and the very aspect of the people, that power is derived from the consent of the governed. These are very revolutionary, you could also say blasphemous thoughts. And so how we measure that to this day is still in question. There are people in this country who believe that if I win elections, it's fair, and if you win them, they're not fair. You cheated. There's one person who articulates that more than anybody else. There's never been a time where you could undermine our core aspects of our democracy by constantly saying you never lost when you clearly did. There's never any other time to challenge the very aspect of the consent of the governed and to be a government of, for, and by the people than when you say that things are only fair when I say that they are. That sort of action, that sort of process, flies in the face of this very document. And when I think about that, and I think of what would John Adams do, WWJAD, what would John Adams do? Now, just to be clear, I'm a John Adams fanboy. All right, I think he is by far the most underrated founding father. All right, I think Adams is somebody who never gets the type of love and the attention that he so rightfully deserves. But Adams wouldn't stand for something like this. And I think that is something we have to really remember. Now, that's really the thing I wanted to spend some time on here. I didn't really spend a long time here, but I love the Declaration. I love this country. And I think those who love it, and those who are proud to be here, and those who constantly desire to think that there's no other place that we would rather be, it does not always deserve our unabashed praise. We are free to criticize. How people hear that criticism and take that criticism, that's entirely up to them. And you can be an adult about that, or you can be petty about that. And in our state, if you criticize a leader, it's almost as if you took their head and gave them, and stuck it down the toilet and flushed it. That's what's called a swirly. And they get so upset. How dare you criticize me? Oh my goodness. It is my First Amendment right to do something like that. Now, I have no control as to how people take that. That's why I often scoff when leaders say that, that people like me in my profession are making students feel bad. I have no control over how a student feels. Zero. I have no control over the student reading material. I can tell them that they need to read it. Doesn't mean that they will. So when we curate certain types of materials, and if that somehow makes someone feel bad, that's not on me, that's on them. That tells me they're not ready to learn. That tells me that they still have a very sensitive side that has never been ironed out, that has never been made strong, that they still live in soft glass areas. That tells me that they're possibly not ready for this world. If you come into my class and I tell you that all men are created equal, and I give you this evidence from the Declaration, and if that somehow offends you, that's not on me. That's on you. Or if you come into my class with the wrong type of information and you want to battle me over it, it's fine to debate. I don't have a problem with that. But if you're going to tell me that I'm wrong, you better have evidence, as opposed to, I heard it from somewhere, or I heard it through the grapevine, as the song goes. No, thank you. The evidence that you have is only going to sharpen your argument. Iron will sharpen iron. And so you come into here and you say, I don't think that we have that certain people are not afforded unalienable rights. You better have an argument as to why. And the 14th Amendment makes it clear that if you're born in this country, you are a citizen. And it also makes it clear that the Supreme Court, for some reason, it wasn't a 9-0 decision. I'm still going to scratch my head about that. Looking at you, Alito, Clarence Thomas, Gorsuch. And then you got Kavanaugh, who was, hedging his bets. But it just blows my mind that people will tell me that the 14th Amendment it means something for some but not the other. That's not what the wording is, folks. It is clear. I've argued that. I had one person I'll never forget this. One person insinuated that I was a radical leftist because I dare argue that birthright citizenship is a reality. I'm radical. What? What do you mean? How is reading what is clearly stated making me radical? But again, the way I feel about that is what this person has no control over. I refuse, and I still refuse to this very day, to give the person that sort of satisfaction that he can get under my skin. That person knows who he is. I'm sure this will get back to him in some way. But I think it's worth noting that I think less of that person day in and day out than what he probably thinks that I do. It's interesting, though, as we celebrate our 250th anniversary, of course, my mother will text me and call it a birthday, and I get really upset about that because, side note here, July 4th was not... It's not the day we were born or anything like that. We actually declared our independence on July 2nd. So, when you're hearing this, I've already celebrated Independence Day. It was July 2nd when the Second Continental Congress adopted the Lee Resolution. Y'all can Google it. I just gave you a picture of it. It came from Richard Henry Lee from Virginia. And in that right there, it says, we declare our independence. The Declaration is a public statement that gets adopted on July the 4th. Interesting. Okay. That's all I really wanted to spend time about here today. This is something that I take very, very seriously. I hope we will reflect on where we are as a country, because I don't think we're in a good place. And this will be one of the last things. I'm going to probably make some people mad about this. There are those who argue that God chooses our leaders and puts them in the situations that they are for whatever purpose. I'm not going to mock that. What I am going to say is I don't think they're entirely wrong. But if you think that they're put there for positive purposes, I don't think that's always the case. I was interviewed once in 2001 because I got to go to the inauguration of George W. Bush through what's called Presidential Classroom. I don't even know if that's even still around. I don't have any idea. But I was there on January 20th of 2001. I got to see Bill Clinton come out, and he got cheered, and and then I saw George Bush come out, and they're very tepid. It was a rainy day. It was not exactly a fun, warm day because it's in January. So and it's in D.C. So what? It's not like we're in Houston or something, or in Myrtle Beach or off the coast there in Florida, but. It's interesting whenever we think about, what these days are and what took place. But I remember being interviewed for that by a local media person, and that local media person said something along the lines of I'll never forget it. Said that God is trying to teach us a lesson with Bill Clinton. And that made me go, that made me really kind of think about what was being meant there, because of the whole impeachment and all this and that. And this is what you get when you don't listen, and so on and so on. I'd like to apply that same logic to Donald Trump, to the president. That this is the type of leader you get when you're not listening. Ken Paxton is the type of leader you get when you're not listening. The correct leader is in the face, with you, looking at you, staring at you, and you choose somebody else. And then you're left with all these sets of problems. because clearly the paths were shown to you. People were blinded by the light, as the old song goes. Blinded by a different light. It's something that I often toy around with that in my head. I usually keep it to myself because people like to, they think that God will only choose the good for the good, and I totally understand that. I totally think that's not entirely wrong, but I think there's also points to where you have clear options and you can choose the wrong one. Recently, there's been this conversation about U.S. Senate races here in Texas with James Talarico and Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton was recently on he was videoed going on a vacation during the 250th anniversary of this country, by the way, to Iceland. And apparently it was maybe a little getaway with his mistress, Tracy Doohan. Somebody caught him. Somebody took videoed him, and Paxton was entirely thrilled with it. You can Google it. You can find it. For those who think about character, and those who listen to the words of Paxton that says that his faith got him through that sham impeachment. Is his faith getting him through that? Is his faith getting him through this little traveling time with his mistress? I'd like to know that. If Paxton had any brains, he'd say, probably we really shouldn't go. Probably need to pack this up and go back to Texas. Probably need to get back to work for the people. Probably need to go on a campaign and talk about things. At least Ted Cruz, said, going to Cancun when everyone's freezing is wrong. Doesn't really feel right. At least he did that. Paxton just said, yeah, you're filming me. I don't really like it, but I'm going to go enjoy myself in Iceland. The gall. But his key supporters don't care. They don't care about character. Even a recent poll suggested that Talarico he has far more marks on character than Paxton does. That's amazing. So as we think about, does God put leaders where they are? I'm reminded of this person in the media who asked me 25 years ago, who made this point to me about, well, maybe he puts people in certain situations to tell us to really teach us a lesson. Okay, Ken Paxton is teaching us a lesson. Don't vote for this guy anymore. You can't vote for sleazeballs. This country voted for a sleazeball 2 out of 3 times. And we're still in this malaise of an economy. We're still stuck in the mud. And yet all that goofball can do is, this is a beautiful thing. We're doing beautiful things out there on the lawn. There's so many people coming through. I got a beautiful, beautiful lawn out there. Something's wrong with the reflecting pool. It's not reflecting. I don't know. Just so many vandals coming through. No, dude, you just messed it up. Everything this guy touches turns to hit if you put the letter S in front of it. I don't know. I'm of the mindset that if the framers could see the type of people we elected, they would look at us and go, that was the whole reason for that electoral college. So you guys wouldn't be electing unqualified imbeciles to serve in these positions? I don't know. It's just some thoughts. I'm not trying to end on a sour note here, but I think what we always have to remember when we think about this country is that we've come so far and we have so far to go. Again, this declaration sets up the very concept of a more perfect union. And I think we need to take advantage of that. I think we need to realize, okay, this is what needs to happen. This is, we still have to answer the question, is this a government of, for, and by the people? Of, by, and for. And if it is, we can't let it perish from the earth. And we have to answer that question at the end of the Star-Spangled Banner. Does that flag wave? Does it still fly over a land of the free and a home of the brave? I don't think the answer that people want me to say right now is an honest assessment. I think it can be. And that's where my hope is. I'm not saying that we are just so terrible and all this sort of thing, but what I am saying is this. I'm hopeful for a future. I'm hopeful of what can be. I have a vision of what this country can be. That we learn from the past to make better mistakes. I'm sorry. Not better mistakes. Oh my gosh. We learn from the past to make better choices, to have better experiences for the future. That's my point. I don't know if this saying is always true, but I remember hearing a lot when I was a younger person, was that you get wisdom and better experience as you age. Something to the effect of this, by the way. You get better experience and wisdom as you get older because you learned from all the bad choices and the not so great experiences you endured when you were younger. Maybe. I'm not going to totally dismiss that, but I don't think it's everything and the end-all be-all. I think that's part of our story. I think that's part of who we are. We have to learn from the past. We have to learn that these aren't the type of leaders we want to have anymore. We have to learn as we get back to basics. That saying that an election happened, I accept the results, I respect the institutions, I respect the voice of the people, and I will accept those results and I will respect those results and I'll let that be it. At some point we'll get there. But it has to be one side that has to not only just be the only side. Because all I see right now is one side saying, if I win, it's fair. If you win, you're cheating. That's not the system that the framers had in mind, or what this declaration is trying to bring out here. Okay. But I think we have the ability to achieve great things. This country is too big to think small and too big to be petty. And that's my hope. As this country apparently turns 250 years old. Still a pretty young country, especially compared to our friends across the Atlantic Pond and across the Pacific Pond. And even our shared name of the Americas south of the equator. We're still a fairly young country. And I think we're going to learn that this is a giant bump in the road and we have to repair that bump. I'm hopeful of that. And that's what I'm going to remember here as we celebrate independence. That we as a people are meant to be created equally. And is that a self-evident truth? I'm of the mind at some point we'll say yes to that question. All right. Thank you so much for listening and or watching to the Outsider Podcast. I really appreciate your time whenever, wherever, and however you are listening. Folks, if you would like to be on the show, all right, I have an open mic policy. I don't, you don't always have to agree with me to be on this program. Just shoot me an email, the.outsider806@gmail.com. That's the.outsider806@gmail.com. And you say you'd like to be on the show, we can set up something and we can have a good conversation. Of course, there are times when I just want to talk, I just want me on here. I know that sounds kind of selfish, but sometimes that's what I want. And this was one of those times. I do have a few conversations coming up here in the next few weeks, and I'm very excited about that. Next week, I'll have another candidate on the program, and then the week after that, I'm actually going to have a social media influencer. I'm very excited about that as well. So stay tuned, keep watching, and folks, always appreciate you, and I'll see you again very, very soon.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.